From the vistas of the Grand Tetons, we welcome you to Lost River Legends. Our motto, Ex Tenebris, Latin for out from the shadows. Here we discuss Bigfoot, skinwalkers, UFOs, aliens, and other paranormal topics. We want you to join us in seeking that which is hidden and obscured from our view. We hope you enjoy the show and encourage you to reach out to us at lostriverlegends@gmail.com to share your story and leave us a message. You can also reach us at lostriverlegends.com to find access to all of our episodes, guest bios, show notes, and our blog. Prepare yourself and get settled in and comfortable as your hosts, James and Brett, enter into the realm of shadows. Enjoy the show.
Everybody, welcome to episode number 5. My name is Brett, and we have a great show planned for you this evening. We're excited to have Timothy Renner on the other line. Tonight, we're going to be talking about Bigfoot, wild men, and strangeness that has plagued the minds of men for hundreds of years. But before we get started, we'd like to give a brief introduction to Timothy. Timothy is an author of several books. He's an illustrator and a paranormal investigator living out of Pennsylvania. Timothy also runs a podcast called Strange Familiars. We'd like to give Timothy a big thanks for coming on and being a guest on this evening's show. And without any further delay, let's get started. Hey everybody, we'd like to welcome you to Lost River Legends tonight. Special guest this evening is Timothy Renner. And Timothy's on the phone with us tonight. And tonight we're going to be discussing some of the books that Timothy has written and talking about one of his upcoming books and some of the strange events that have taken place in those books. And Timothy, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing good. Happy to be here.
Well, I'm a big fan of your books. I actually own your 2 Bigfoot books, and I purchased earlier this year, right after you released it, Beyond the Seventh Gate, and those are incredible books. And huge fan of your work, and there's a lot of work that goes into these books.
Well, thank you. Yeah, when I was doing music for all those years, I never thought. I guess I thought one day I'll write a book or something. It never was going to be a thing. And then Beyond the Seventh Gate was, it's the first book I did, and it started out really as an article, and then about halfway, into it, I went, well, this is enough for a book. I can make this into a book. And once I started doing it, it's like a drug or something. I got really addicted. I love writing books. I like making things. I always have. And books it's a real accomplishment. Especially I'm doing the illustrations as well as the writing and stuff. So it's a lot of fun for me, and it's something I really like to do.
Yeah, that's incredible. And the fact that you're doing so many things and you're doing all those things by yourself. I mean, you have your own podcast, Strange Familiars, and you have your website, you got your social media, you got the books, you got the music. I mean, you're doing a lot of things by yourself. That's a lot of self-accomplishment right there.
Yeah, well, I grew up in the American hardcore punk scene, which was about, when I was in it, was about do it yourself. It was about always, and that's really the lesson I took from it. It's funny. I went on to make folk music, which is, has almost nothing in common with that. But I did take lessons from that, and it was very much, in the '80s when I was coming up through that. It was all about doing it yourself. It was, if you want a band, just start a band. If you wanted to do a record label, don't wait for someone else to start a record label for you. Start a record label. Don't wait for somebody to put your record out. Do it yourself. And it's great lessons, and it's something that the internet has made a lot easier to do nowadays. You can, people can self-publish a book and not be obscure. You can get your book self-published, and you can get it on Amazon, and people can find it, and it's just a great time to be a creator, I think, and I'm lucky to be able to do it full time. But like I said, it's what I love to do. I always have to be working on something. Well, and it makes finding old information easier too. Like the historical Bigfoot books I've done, there were some people who did them like pre-internet, or maybe at the dawn of the internet. They had published historical Bigfoot books, and I man, they must have, my hat's off to them, because I have it a lot easier. Just doing research electronically is a lot easier than doing it just going through microfilm and stuff. I've done both for the Bigfoot in Pennsylvania. I did both, and it's a lot easier doing electronic research than going through, like I said, going through microfilm, or going through old papers and old books and stuff, which these guys had to do before the internet. They had to go to these libraries and historical societies and stuff and find these newspaper articles, and it's a lot harder for them to do.
Yeah, that's incredible. That's something I often think about, is how hard people had it back in the day. And if they wanted to write something in a news article or in a newspaper or publish a book, it was nothing like it's done today. And so the medium for writing a book or publishing content nowadays, it's completely different. It's pretty incredible if you think about it.
Yeah, we have it a lot easier than guys did back in the day, for sure.
So in your little intro, you talked about Pennsylvania, and Pennsylvania for a long time, it's been an incredibly paranormal hotspot. So you're from Pennsylvania. I believe Tony Merkel from the Confessionals, I think he's from Pennsylvania. We have Stan Gordon, who was recently on Sasquatch Chronicles. He's from Pennsylvania, and there's an incredible amount of paranormal activity coming out of Pennsylvania. So I wanted to ask, I've never personally been to Pennsylvania, but since you live there, and these paranormal events are so prevalent, what got you started into that, and how that led into you investigating the paranormal, writing your books, starting your Strange Familiars podcast? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, I grew up in northern Maryland, so I wasn't far from Pennsylvania, and for instance, my family did a lot of their shopping in Pennsylvania. We were that close, but for me, there was always, even back then, there was always something about Pennsylvania. I liked the state. There was something about it. I kind of knew I'd always end up living there, even as a little kid. I don't know why, but my interest in the paranormal it really was sparked by. I think I've always been into it. It was just one of those kids who was into spooky stuff and monsters and everything. But I grew up in what I call the sort of golden age of Bigfoot, where In Search of was on TV, and The Legend of Boggy Creek was in theaters, and the Patterson Gimlin film was shot a few years before I was born, and it just seemed like this storm of like Bigfoot interest, and it kind of reached pop culture at that time in the 70s. It was on, the $6 Million Man had Bigfoot on, and there was a TV show I think called Bigfoot and Wild Boy, I believe. That was like a Saturday morning thing. So it was in pop culture. It was just all around. And so there was that, and then there was a little local library that I would go to that was probably 20-foot square or something like that. Just this little rural library in northern Maryland near where I lived, and they happen to have a encyclopedia set called Man, Myth, and Magic, which to this day I absolutely love it. And it's what it sounds like. It's just an encyclopedia. It's just weird stuff, myths and stuff from all over the world, all different cultures and folklore and so forth. And I would get a book out, the book starting with A, and then the next week I get B, and I go week to week until I hit Z, and then I'd turn around and get A out again. And I would just, every week, that's what I would do. And I just obsessed over those books, and I loved them. So I think they were like my gateway drug to the paranormal.
I actually have a similar background. As far as that curiosity as a kid, the time that they'd let us into the library, it was always straight to the Guinness World Records, straight to Bigfoot, UFO, whatever was weird in the library. That's where you could find me.
Yeah. We had one Bigfoot book in our elementary school library, and I remember I just I got it out every single time. I don't know if they still have the cards that go in the back of them somewhere, but I'm sure my name is on there, again and again and again. I would just get the one Bigfoot book that they had there out over and over again.
Yeah, that was the internet of the, eh, all previous time until it was, a public thing. I remember walking through a field from hanging out at a friend's house or walking to a store, and my buddy goes, "Yeah, my dad said this thing called the internet's going to take over the whole world, and it's going to change everything, and it's like AOL, but think about it being 1,000 times bigger." That was the best we could describe the internet.
And it was inconceivable. Like I remember my wife telling me about YouTube, like in the very early days of YouTube, and I'm like, what? Like you can just watch videos? Because she was watching like band videos or something there, and it was like such a weird concept to me. I'm like for free, you can just go watch videos. She was like, yeah. And now it's, of course you can. Of course, YouTube's a huge thing. But at the time, it was so bizarre to me, the idea that, I'm dating myself now.
Yeah, I think we all are a little. That's okay. I think it's awesome to kind of straddle the different generations of information, and to kind of grasp it and be riding the wave of it a little bit. Um, I've actually had a little. This is James versus Brett. We sound a lot alike. I apologize. I just kind of piped in there. I've actually spent a little over 2 years in the Pennsylvania area, living in Erie. I lived in Latrobe, Slippery Rock, and then down in Moundsville, um, West Virginia. So those are all kind of the different areas that I'm familiar with. Um, what neck of the woods are you in? Or
I'm in South Central, so York County.
Okay. So near Harrisburg.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I recently spent some time out near Lancaster, and we made our way towards Gettysburg and down there. So that's kind of closer to northern Maryland, but still
Yeah,
not.
you would have basically driven by my house if you went from Lancaster to Gettysburg.
Yeah. Now, does the Susquehanna flow near your area?
It's yeah, I mean we're not quite a river town here where I'm in Red Line, but we're not far from it. I spent a lot of time at there. I was at the river today hiking. So
It's an interesting river, just the way how wide it is and how shallow it is, like, and how it flows. It's just kind of got a little bit different look to it.
yeah, it's it's quite a thing. I mean, it's when I guess when I first moved here, I didn't realize like how important the river was to these towns and stuff before before there was a motor vehicles and such. And it's just huge. The Susquehanna was massive in the development of this area.
Yeah, I know historically that there's, in the early 1800s, there was a lot of movement and things. You go up north, and the whole Erie Canal was just a big major thoroughfare for getting people and their stuff moved around. So it's interesting how the water is always kind of played into things a little bit. I want to say that there's a few interesting sightings near the Susquehanna, and I don't know if that rings a bell for you or not.
Oh, I mean, so I have these, what I'll call areas of interest. Toad Road, which I write about, and Site 7, which is an area we talk about on the podcast a lot, and I write about that in my new book. That's a code name because it's private property. We don't want people going there. And I've done a lot of work on writing about Delta, Pennsylvania, which is I had an article in the latest Wood Knocks Volume 3 book all about Delta, and they're all right along the river. Like everything, all these areas of interest are just right there along the river. So yeah, there's a lot of weird stuff happens. A lot of UFO sightings over the Susquehanna too.
Yeah, there's an interesting connection in the land there. It's been used, by natives for years and years, and then the early settlers and the early colonists, and then it's had an interesting history there. You've got a lot of mining, you've got a lot of things that go on. It, I'm not sure what aspects of those are contributing factors to the different paranormal stuff that goes on, or if it's a certain concentration of elements. I know there's a lot of coal, there's a lot of limestone. What do you think it is?
That's one of these huge questions. Just my gut says it has something to do with the movement of water. And this is based on nothing. Everyone's theory on this stuff. If someone says that, these things are interdimensional, or it's really down to science fiction because nobody can prove anything yet. So my little bit of science fiction is it has to do with the movement of water over certain kinds of rock, I think. And again, this is just gut feeling. I don't know. It's just a theory I have. Um, but it might be the limestone thing. A lot of people have talked about limestone and quartz sort of holding records, for lack of a better word. They sort of have memory, and we certainly have a lot of limestone and a big line of quartz that runs right through here. I really don't know. It's one of these question mark, mystery things, and you'll find me very agnostic on a lot of stuff. I just, like I said, it's science fiction until we can prove it. So I kind of step back and I'll do the Ron Moorhead thing. If people say, oh, it's this, okay, you could be right.
Yeah, there's a lot of different people in the paranormal community that that's the most frequent question I think that they're asked in whatever aspect of the paranormal that they specialize in, that they're interested in. You could be right, you could be wrong, who knows? And I think that
Yeah.
part of me part of me agrees with that, and part of me is a little bit. I'm such a curious person, such a curious minded person, that I'm like, well, I want to know what the truth is. Like there has to be a answer. There has to be the truth about something. And I think that we're, as we research and we study and we read these books and we have discussions and we have try to find common ground, I think that we can eventually get there. Who knows when that's going to happen or how it's going to happen? But I hope that all this work that we're doing, people like yourself that are doing books, that are boots on the ground, that are doing some serious research, I hope that we can all really kind of put that together into perspective and really reach a consensus as to actually what's going on. And I hope during my lifetime, who knows if this will happen, but it'd be nice to know if some of these things, whether it be Sasquatch, Bigfoot, UFOs, if we can find out a little bit more information, it would certainly be a breath of fresh air.
I hope you're right. But honestly, if we take Bigfoot as an example, they've been living in the woods next to us for as long as we've been keeping records all over the world. We don't know that much about them. People will claim they have all the answers. But they don't. No one has all the answers. A lot of people, will swear up and down that it's absolutely a physical creature and it's just a natural animal. The more I'm into this, the less I believe that. It just becomes less and less likely the more time goes on, and we don't have a body and we don't have anything in the fossil record that looks like it. I'm not saying they're not real. They're absolutely real. I believe they're absolutely real. They're actually absolutely physical at times. What that means beyond that, I can't tell you. But I think we have to be prepared to sit with the messiness of it all. And I believe that's a Terence McKenna quote. And that's just accept that it's a mess, and people haven't solved it since the beginning of time, and we're probably not going to solve it. I'd love some kind of answers. We might get, we might get some answers. We might get some more information, but I think these things have been with us for a very long time, and unless we're willing to look at things in a holistic sense and incorporate folklore and sort of psi research and these things that make the flesh and blood Bigfoot people very uncomfortable, then we're not gonna. It's just it's not going to be solved because there's something very, very weird about all of this, and I believe it's all connected on some level. UFOs, ghosts, Bigfoot. There's too much similar stuff that runs through it. There's similar currents that run through all of it, and it's very, very weird stuff. And I'm open to finding answers, but I think you have to come to terms with the idea that you may never have any answers at all.
Yeah, and I think that claiming to have 100% of the answers, I think that for any, it's not helping anyone to do that, even the person that claims to have that.
Right. I mean, if we take Bigfoot as an example again, just because it's that's kind of where I live with a lot of this stuff. There are folks who will absolutely declare they're nothing more than a natural animal, an undiscovered animal, et cetera, et cetera. But then they have to make up all these wacky kind of I call them like mental Rube Goldberg devices to like about disappearing footprints. Like we have tons and tons and tons of examples of footprints that go out into the middle of a field and disappear, and they come up with these wacky explanations for how and why that happened. Everything from superhuman jumps that they jump so far that you could never see the other set of tracks, to Bigfoot tiptoeing backwards in his own tracks, which is an absolutely ridiculous concept. When they don't know, like no one's ever seen them do this. No one's ever seen Bigfoot make a stick structure, but people will talk about stick structures as if they're absolutely 100% Sasquatch, constructed. Now, do they appear in places where people see Bigfoot? Yeah. Is it likely? Well, I don't know. It's possible. It's certainly possible they're made. I call them Bigfoot stick structures and so forth as a shorthand. But there's a lot of assumptions people make. People smell something bad and get a stone thrown at them in the woods, and they immediately say Bigfoot. Well, a lot of poltergeist accounts have people inside smelling something bad and getting stones thrown at them in their own house, and they never say Bigfoot when it's in their house. So there's a lot of conclusions people jump to that are unwarranted. That I just think we should leave the doors open until we know for sure.
Yeah, and I think the Occam's razor approach is probably the safest, and then I think what we have going on now is kind of a convergence, a little bit of the information sharing. I feel like is flowing. I hear about infighting and things like that. We personally haven't had to deal with that, but I think that there's so much room for not so much to gain consensus, but to say, hey, here's a piece of the puzzle. Here's a different piece. How, do these fit together? Do they overlap? And kind of being able to walk away with kind of lifting together as a community.
Yeah, there's certainly some of that. There's it tends to be the people who do claim to have it all figured out that you get the real hard pushback from, and they tend to be people who would get angry, at other theories. They don't just say I don't believe that, or I think that's nuts. They actually get angry at them at other theories, which is it's like, why are you getting angry? Like it's not. This is how anyone else can have whatever opinion they want. It's nothing to get angry about. It's we should like you said, we should be sharing information and exchanging ideas.
And in light of that, we'd like you to share some of those encounters. I don't know if you have some curated for us today. I do like some of those West Coast wild men stories that are older, that have been taken from some of those archival places. Not very many people reach back into history and bring that to the surface, but you've done that with these books.
Yeah, I started releasing these. So after my first book, Beyond the Seventh Gate, I found so many of these old articles, which are so cool in there, and that was just concentrating on 3 counties: York, Lancaster, and Adams County, Pennsylvania. I thought, well, I want to like do the whole state of Pennsylvania. And as I was doing the whole state of Pennsylvania, I started finding articles for other states, and then I thought, well, you know what? I can do the whole country, not in one book, but I'll do it in sections. I'll do, so I thought I might have enough to do California, Oregon, and Washington State, each as separate states, just because that's supposed to be, land of Bigfoot up there, out there. But in fact, and I think this is just because there were fewer newspapers out there at this time to report on stuff. I had to combine them in one book. I'm going to do the rest of the country likewise. There'll be, most states won't have their own book like I did for Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania just happened to have a ton of stuff where I could devote a book to it. But I'm going to continue. I'll do, different regions of the country. I haven't figured out how exactly I'm going to break everything down yet. But there's more books on the way because there's tons of these old articles out there, and they're fantastic. So the thing that I preface all these with is they didn't have the word Bigfoot or Sasquatch back then. They called anything that was upright and kind of looked like a man, they called a wild man. And this is up until about the turn of the last century, up until about 1900. Around 1900, they'll start calling them gorillas because people start seeing gorillas in zoos and so forth, and they have a name to call something that's upright and covered in hair. Before that, it just was like a hairy man. So they never use the word Bigfoot. And sometimes these articles seem like they're talking about maybe it's like an itinerant of some sort. Maybe it's just an old miner, an old mountain man, or something like that. But from the behavior and from the descriptions, I've come to say like a lot of them, it definitely sounds like Bigfoot, and the most interesting thing for me is the behavior. And over time, I've noticed that that's become more interesting to me even than the descriptions of the creatures, is the description of the behavior. So there's a lot of things in these old reports, like these creatures attacking dogs, for instance. They do not like dogs, or peeking in windows, or peeking from behind trees, recognizing what firearms are, these are all reported in modern Bigfoot reports. And I know that these people who are reporting this stuff, these modern reports, they were not reading these old reports because they simply weren't published at the time. So when you read these behaviors that occur in these old reports and new ones, that's what has really convinced me more than anything else that what they were seeing back then is what people were seeing today. So all that said, this is an article from 1906 from Darby, Pennsylvania. This is in my book, Bigfoot in Pennsylvania. Ape-like animal scares up people in Delaware County. Trap set for it, pulled up by roots, wires and chains snapped. Darby, Pennsylvania, November 24th. All Delaware County is exercised over the antics of a strange gorilla-like animal, which has been frightening belated pedestrians almost out of their wits in widely separated parts of the county within the last 2 weeks. One night it was seen near Chester, another night it was seen prowling near Media, and again it was seen running along the roads on all fours in Morton. It runs like a racehorse, walking sometimes upright like a man, or else running along at racehorse speed on all fours, with a peculiar leaping stride, and covered with a heavy coat of hair. The animal is differently described by those who see it. The Negroes have become terrorized, and in many sections of the country cannot be induced to pass certain localities after dark where the animal has been seen. Others have stocked themselves with all manner of weapons to put an end to the freak, and still have fled. Some are of the opinion that it is an escaped ape from the zoo, which is strengthened by the fact that a representative from the Zoological Gardens was making inquiries in Springfield Township a few days ago concerning it. Traps have been set for it, only to be pulled up by the roots, and the heavy wires and chains snapped like sugar twine. Frank Carr of Springfield, aided by several of his neighbors last Tuesday week, got out 2 heavy steel bear traps, baited and set them. The strange animal had been seen lurking in the woods nearby at nights, and it was determined to capture it. The traps were set in an enclosure in the back of Mr. Carr's house, but the next morning both were sprung, the bait eaten off, and a section of heavy telegraph wire, with which was fastened to a big oak tree, was snapped like a thread. The ground was clawed up as if newly furrowed, and the traps were found several rods away, as if carried that distance before the animal released itself. It was reported last Sunday night as having been seen in media on Washington Street near the residence of the United States Marshal John B. Robinson, but it disappeared in the darkness. That's from the Philadelphia Inquirer, November 25th, 1906. I must apologize. Some of these old articles are less than politically correct. So that's just the nature of the article.
Yeah, no, that's something you actually talk about quite a bit in your books. You're like, all right, I'm just quoting here. Like, it's not, the world we live in right now, it's a completely different one. And so, but, besides the political correctness and some of the racial biases in those reports, I love the word usage. I mean, you can tell that it's written in the time frame that it's written, right? Like they just have a way of writing that really puts you in the shoes of that time, and I love that.
Yeah, there's something about just the way these old articles were written, which is just fantastic. Which is like that was another decision on my part. Was like these need to be reprinted. These are so great. So this is probably my favorite report. This is from 1920. In 1920, across Pennsylvania, 1920 and 1921, there was this gorilla flap. And these articles mention gorillas, and they often mention that, there was an escaped gorilla. This actually doesn't match up. My wife is just coincidentally a circus historian, and she knows all about these old circuses and so forth. And there weren't that many gorillas in the United States to begin with. At some points during these supposed gorilla flaps, there were no gorillas in the United States to escape from circuses. But there weren't that many. They were very expensive. They were, at the time, it would be the equivalent of something like $500,000 in today's money or something like that to get a live gorilla. Super expensive. They didn't just let them escape. When they did escape, they hunted them down. They absolutely did get them back, but they didn't escape that frequently. And gorillas are tropical creatures. They could not live in Pennsylvania in December, which is when this gorilla flap starts, so-called gorilla flap. So this is Altoona Tribune, December 15th, 1920. Giant gorilla creates fear in Snyder County. Animal believed to have escaped from carnival breaks boy's arm during attack. Had previously been wounded. Visits Bolig Farm quite often. The appearance of a man-ape or gorilla in the mountains of Snyder County has caused great excitement among the residents of that section where the animal was seen. The big ape was first seen 3 weeks ago by Samuel Bolig of Miser, a small town in Snyder County. The animal is supposed to be one that escaped some time ago from a carnival and which has since been living in the mountains of that section of the state. Samuel and Margaret Bolig, the children of Charles Bolig, were gathering kindling wood one night in November with the light of a search lamp when a huge animal about 7 feet tall and that stood up like a man was discovered by the children within the circle of light. It looked to them like a huge monkey, and when discovered, dropped on all fours and ambled away, soon disappearing in the darkness. A week later, the same animal was discovered in a cornfield on the Bolig farm, which is at the foot of the mountain. Samuel procured a .32 caliber rifle and took a shot at the huge man creature, evidently wounding it as it fell at the shot, rolling over several times on the ground. The boy and his father trailed the wounded ape some distance by the blood, but were unable to overtake it, and at length gave up the pursuit. On Monday night of the present week, the strange creature made its third appearance on the Bolig farm. Charles Bolig was engaged in chopping wood by the light of a lantern when the ape appeared near enough to be seen. The son ran to the house and procured the rifle, but before he could shoot the gorilla, it viciously attacked him, knocking him down and breaking his arm, and was finally driven away by the father. The lad lay on the ground in an unconscious condition. He was taken to the house and soon after recovered his senses, and it was found that he was not seriously injured. He suffered much from shock, but is expected to be fully recovered in a short time. A large number of men with rifles started out to hunt the animal, but 100 Lewistown hunters are scouring the narrows and surrounding county toward the Snyder County line in the hope of getting a shot at the huge creature and killing it, as its presence has caused the greatest consternation in that section, the gorilla being a very dangerous animal on account of its great size, strength, and savage nature. So what I like about that, I don't like that the boy got attacked, but it demonstrates this sort of culture of revenge that we see in modern Bigfoot accounts where people shoot them and they'll follow them home and then torment them or even wait for a time and attack them at a later date. And the other thing is this: it says it's 7 foot tall. The tallest gorilla there's ever been on record has been 6 foot tall. So once again, a 7 foot tall gorilla just eliminates the possibility of it being some kind of African escaped gorilla from a carnival.
Yeah, and historically, gorillas were discovered in what, 1902, and it's interesting that that's kind of their go-to suspect. Do you think that has to do with the recent discovery, like some kind of visual connotation that was represented in the news at the time?
Yeah, I mean, I think people were seeing pictures of them for the first time, and they were getting, Darwin wasn't too long before that, so I think you get this kind of perfect storm of things, and they go from being wild men to being gorillas, in these old articles.
It's really interesting that there's that transition that you can kind of track it. That it's like they're data points that you can see that these data points are lining up in a certain way.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, and like I said, it's right around 1900. You'll get a few, as early as 1880 where they call them gorillas, and you'll get wild man reports into the 1920s and even up into the 1950s here and there. You'll get a wild man report, but there's a strong, like change from wild man to gorilla right around 1900.
And not necessarily all these reports are using the verbiage of gorilla or ape or monkey necessarily as a descriptor. And like you said, there's the West Coast wild man. Some people have wild man, and so it's not always the gorilla that's being labeled as a suspect. But you said, like you said before, the gorilla, or excuse me, the Bigfoot and the Sasquatch, that terminology hadn't come along for a long time. And they're just using the best that they can to describe this creature, this being, whatever you want to call it, as they interacted with it.
Yeah, and even into the 1970s and 1980s, you get weird names for Bigfoot across the country. Like, I've collected a few around here. I talked to one guy, and he said, we didn't have Bigfoot. We had something. I know there's something in Wisconsin called a hodag or something. But he said we had a hodag here, and I was like, oh, like what was that? And he said, well, it was this big tall thing, walked like a man, covered in hair, it's about 8 foot tall, eyes glowed red, the whole basically describes a Bigfoot. And I said, well, why wouldn't you call that Bigfoot? He said, well, Bigfoot lives in California. We're not in California, we're in Pennsylvania. It's a hodag. So you have these weird local names because people thought Bigfoot lived in California or, Washington State or wherever out west. So you get all these weird names, like Gum Devil was one around here. I'm trying to think of some of the others. A lot of these regional, like, well, that's like the Minerva monster. They might draw comparisons to Sasquatch and so forth, but they had these kind of unique local names for them.
The whole regional aspect of labeling these creatures almost created over time, it almost created like a folklore around this creature, and that the name itself drew familiarity to the creature.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah, and that's that's a big thing. I think folklore is very important. I think people use folklore in a dismissive sense. The word folklore. I've seen, cryptozoologists with a capital C do that a lot. Well, that's just folklore. Yeah, but if you look at folklore reports, man, if they're not describing the same thing people are describing today, and there's something to that. Now, things change culturally, and things might get exaggerated if you go back to these, these really old folklore reports that, before newspapers and stuff. Things might get exaggerated, and they got exaggerated in newspapers sometimes too, which we'll hear in the next article gets a little wacky. But what they're talking about sounds a lot like what people are talking about today. So I do not dismiss folklore at all. I think it's very important. I say in my new book, the way I say it is, people say it's fairy tales. I think you should probably turn that around and think of them instead as tales of the fairies. And they were describing something. These old folklore reports are almost like paranormal reports from long ago. So this is from 1895, and like I said, this one gets a little wacky, but I mean it's a neat story, and it's from the Scranton Tribune, August 3rd, 1895. Halstead's Wild Woman. Thought to be a relative of Binghamton's Harold's Wild Man, who eats horses and picks his teeth with a crowbar. Halstead, Pennsylvania, August 2nd. Our inhabitants are terribly frightened over the appearance of a wild woman, said to be the wife of the wild man seen near Hancock, and many will not go out after dark. She was at Susquehanna on Friday evening after men had quit work and went to a machine shop and removed with perfect ease a balance wheel. She mounted it and rode it toward this place as easily as a man can ride a bicycle. She was met near Smoky Hollow by a peddler with a horse. She dismounted from her balance wheel and possessed the same knack as the wild man did in dislocating the neck of the horse, as with one jerk she broke its neck. With a slight wave of her hand she rendered the poor peddler unconscious. She then dragged the horse to the woods where its bones were found today, showing that she had eaten the horse. The peddler recovered from his severe blow, and while sitting down and thinking over his troubles, he heard two men coming in the darkness, and these proved to be Aaron Rinhart and Jason Melody, who gave the alarm. The wild woman was not pursued until morning, when a large crowd started out in pursuit, and looking over the ground where she had last been seen, immense tracks were discovered, showing the size of her foot, the toes of which measured 6 inches and 1 in diameter. They followed the trail as best they could. As they got near Turkey Hill, they saw, to their astonishment, a pile of rattlesnake skins, showing that the creature eats snakes as well as horses. They returned on Saturday, but had not seen her. It is rumored that she is in a cave near Mount Manitome, but no one dare go to find out. Officers Higgins and Hogan say they will catch her yet, if it is in their power. In an interview, the peddler today informed the correspondent that the woman was about 8.5 feet tall, and he thought weighed over 500 pounds. He said that instead of large sleeves, her arms were covered by a heavy growth of hair, which, he said, would be the style in a few years. So it gets a little goofy. I think there's a reason for that. I think, the more things change, the more they stay the same. And you get these old newspaper reports where the reporter always throws a joke in, or a joke or two. This will happen today if you see big articles in the newspaper about Bigfoot, or even on the TV news. They'll always throw some stupid joke in to kind of let you know with a wink, like, I'm not crazy. I don't believe in Bigfoot. It's these crazy people in the story. So they'll always throw a dumb joke in, and they did that back then as well. They also newspapers would kind of make fun of each other if one newspaper reported, a wild man story or a gorilla story or something. Another newspaper would make fun of it for doing it. That, like, oh, look, those dummies over there at the Times, they actually believe in wild men, et cetera, et cetera. So this sort of same witness shaming and making fun of the topic still goes on today. It happened back then as well.
Well, and that's super unfortunate because I agree. We see that today all the time. And I think if, these journalists that are trying to report on something, if they have some kind of a tongue-in-cheek joke, they're just not taking it seriously and they just kind of hem and haw about it. The listeners, I mean, it's going to affect some listeners that are trying to, that might be interested in it. They're going to be like, well, the tone of that article, the tone of the interview, it just very dismissive in its reality and its truthfulness. But, I was actually, this is kind of an off subject kind of a thing, a little bit, but, you're talking about these stories of how this Bigfoot, this wild man creature, broke this chains, and then you have this one that snapped the neck of a horse. You got all these feats of strength, and it's apparent that these things are huge, larger than most men, heavier than most men, more muscular than most men. And I was just sharing with James the other day, and with my wife actually, that I was listening to a Joe Rogan podcast the other day, and he had interviewed this professional swimmer. His name is Ross Edgley, and he's from Britain. And he was talking about, and he's like a personal trainer as well. He's like a super buff guy, just super high activity level. But it's interesting because he's this personal trainer, and he's talking about how he'll do this kind of experiment. He'll have these people sit down and do a bench press or a leg press, and they'll say, okay, just do as much as you can and just do 1 rep. And they'll max out, and that's like the highest that they can do. And then they'll turn around, and then he and his team will install these electrodes to stimulate those muscles, the same muscles that would be used for that mechanical lift, for the bench press or the leg lift, whatever it might be. And this signal, this electrical signal that they'll feed into the muscle, will override the person's ability. It basically eclipses that person's strength, so to speak, with the previous rep that they did, and they're outlifting in a large way because these signals are overriding that natural dam, that natural force, I guess, that would inhibit a natural growth. And I got talking with my wife saying, well, I wonder if there's something with these creatures that they can just, yeah, they're big and they're huge and they're muscular and they're just, they're just living out in the land and they have to be so strong. But it makes me wonder if there's something else at play that really they can exert their natural selves somehow and escape with certain feats of strength. There was several accounts of people reporting that these things have attacked horses, they've attacked moose, deer, cows, whatever, and they just walk off with this, 700, 800,000 pound creature like it's nothing. It's pretty incredible.
Yeah, and here I'm going to contradict myself and say, let's look at the strength of apes though, and Neanderthal man, and everyone's going, but you said it wasn't an ape. Well, yes, but to be honest, it certainly shares characteristics with primates, pursed lips, hair standing on end, the rocking back and forth when it's irritated. So it would be disingenuous to me to say like this Bigfoot shares nothing with natural primates. It certainly does. In some ways, it very much acts like a natural primate. If it is some kind of relic hominid, if we look at Neanderthal and they can tell from its bone structure and the ways the muscles were attached to the bones, Neanderthal could pick up Dwayne the Rock Johnson and throw him through a goalpost. Like that would be nothing that would be like your average Neanderthal. Was how much stronger they were than a human. 100-pound chimpanzee can deadlift 600 pounds. And they say a male silverback gorilla should be able to lift as much as 1,800 pounds. So if you're talking about an 8-foot Sasquatch, if you take those numbers and just blow them up, I mean, this is something that could lift a car over its head. You know what I mean? It's insane, the amount of strength if you project from other primates. That said, maybe there is something else to it. Maybe there's ways to preternaturally activate, even more strength. We just don't know.
Yeah. It's something that I'm kind of fascinated with. They can break a neck of a horse, and it's just like nothing. It's just mind-boggling.
Yeah, and I think that's I think so many people, when they experience that or when they see that, I think that's why you get this kind of almost PTSD that some people have. I think it's so really alien to see that kind of strength and that kind of power. It's got to be incredibly frightening, especially with people walk around. We generally think we're top of the food chain, and you run into something like that absolutely proves otherwise. I think it's you're in for a big shock.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I couldn't agree more. So Timothy, let's take a look at your new book. Don't Look Behind You: Following Ghost Road and Into the Unknown. And this is kind of a companion book from Beyond the Seventh Gate. Is that correct?
Yeah. So every time I publish a book, without fail, new stories will come that I will go, oh, I wish I had that for the first book. And on top of that, I never stop doing research. So I'm very interested in any topic I'm interested in. I never really quit doing research. For instance, the historical Bigfoot articles for Pennsylvania, I have 20 more since publishing the book that will they'll get published in another volume someday. I always keep at it. And I turned up new history about the area. So I wrote this about this an area called Toad Road in York County. The first book was about half of the first book concentrated on that, kind of dispelling some urban legends and then documenting other weird stuff that happened there. And after I published that, I found new history on the area, some like very interesting kind of weird history that I hadn't documented in the first book. And then a bunch of new witnesses came forward and told me about other cryptid encounters. And I spent some time there, and I was able to add some of my own experiences, some weird stuff that I experienced in the area, to that of the witnesses. And then I also talk about this Site 7 area, which is not far from Toad Road as the crow flies. So it's a companion volume to the first book, but you don't have to read the first book to read the new one, Don't Look Behind You, or vice versa.
So I'm curious. You've talked a lot on your podcast about this very paranormal aspect of a topic that's really kind of come full circle. Flannel Man. Are there any? Is there any plans for you to write about that?
Yeah, I'm working on a Flannel Man book now. I have just from the podcast, I've got some like 40 some encounters, I think, and at this point, just people from all over the world has seen this guy. I've got some working theories as to what it might be, but what it is, I really don't know. It's for people who haven't listened. It's a guy in a red flannel shirt, usually, sometimes blue, sometimes other color, but like 90% of the time, 90% plus, a red flannel shirt and blue work pants or jeans just seems to be showing up. People just see him in their yard. They see him. They wake up. They'll see him in their room. Most people don't get a particularly evil or sinister feeling from him, but people are seeing him everywhere, like all around. Mostly in the United States, but UK and Europe as well.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating. But what are some of the things that listeners might expect in this book? If you can just kind of give us a kind of a 30,000-foot view of some of the topics that you cover in this book.
Well, there's a lot of cryptid stuff. So there's some sort of Class B Bigfoot stuff that leads into a absolute horrifying kind of Class A Bigfoot encounter. At least we think it's Bigfoot until we cover some other cryptids, which came up from other people, and it in fact may have been something else. There's other cryptids that people are reporting in the area. Stan Gordon forwarded a report about a hyena type dog man that people had seen in the area. There's a really compelling report of a Mothman creature people have seen in the area. And a woman called me and told me about a toad man that she had seen, which was weirdly confirmed with something James, the James that co-hosts my podcast with me, had told me that his father had seen in the area. He told me that a year or more before this lady called me. So a lot of weird cryptid stuff. And then my experiences are more synchronicity related. There's a lot of just high strangeness and synchronicity that I report as far as my experiences.
That's really awesome. I never thought that I would have heard someone talk about a toad man. And it's interesting how, people listening would be like, what, really? But it's like, no, really, like, here's a story someone had. It's like you have to consider it in line with the rest of the phenomenon. And I think by putting it out there, it's saying, hey, this is something that's happening.
It seems really bizarre, right? It seems like that is really, really bizarre. But if you dig a little bit, and I'll give you an example. So I get this Toad Man report, and it's right there, and this is along Cador's Creek. It's right where it meets the Susquehanna River. And I start looking at it, and I found this thing from Folklore called the Vodinoi, or the Vodnik. which is a frogman in folklore. It's from Czechoslovakian folklore. It's covered with green hair, but interestingly, it says it has gills, and some versions of it says it has a tail like a fish, and it's like a frogman that lives in the river. Well, so I get this lady who calls me about this frogman. I'm like, what? That's weird. Like, this toadman, rather, she calls it. And she says, that's why the road's called Toad Road. I don't necessarily think that's the case, but, that's what she said. And she tells me about, like, seeing this and being chased on Toad Road by what sounds maybe like Men in Black and so forth. And it's just this really kind of out there story. But then I start digging around, and from 1905, here's a report. Now, this is from 8 miles north of Toad Road. It's not terribly far away. Fish walks like a man. Strange animal alarms residents along the Susquehanna. People residing along the river midway between Cly and Goldsboro are mystified and some alarmed over the sight of a strange creature that has its abode in the Susquehanna. Thus far, but 2 men and their wives have seen the thing. As it was seen in broad daylight, more credence is given to the story than would be if it had been seen at night, when people are more prone to see things. The strange creature, whether fish or animal, is described as being as large as a man. When seen, it came up out of the water, erect like a man, and is described as looking like a man without arms. Those persons who have seen it declare that they are not the victims of an optical illusion. So, 8 miles away from a different time, but it's reporting something, just as weird. So that's where I start, giving these reports more credence. It's not just one person saying something. These are multiple instances of people reporting, something that's like presumably amphibious and coming out of the water. Very, very strange.
I love that, and I love that approach that you are able to bring to it, because you bring in that Czechoslovakian background piece, and then the piece that there's this old report, and then there's a new report. You've got 3 data points that kind of triangulate, and you got to say, hey, there's something to this. That's fascinating.
I mean, maybe. I mean, there seems to be something to it. It seems like people are seeing something. What that is, that's the bigger question.
Right, and I think the pursuit of that, the chase of that, or the gathering of that information, that's the fun part. It's trying to chase it down and try to make sense of these things that don't seem to make sense.
Yeah, that's what I love doing the most. Just making these kind of connections, doing these researches, and connecting the dots like that. That's where that's the most fun thing for me about doing all this. I mean, I like, obviously I like on the ground stuff. I like being out there and get my boots on the ground. I like just being in the woods and being on site at these spooky places and stuff. But as far as book research and stuff, that's where I absolutely love it, and I'm happy to be my next book. I think will be my next book. The book I'm working on currently is with Joshua Cutchin, and we're writing a Bigfoot book, and he likes to do the same thing. He makes connections like that, so it's a really happy match for me to be working with Joshua. Also, he's a better writer than me, so it's a kind of feather in my cap to be writing with him. But I'm really excited about that. But he likes to make those connections as well. So that's just something I just absolutely love doing.
Awesome. Well, we can't thank you enough for coming on the show. We appreciate you taking the time, and we actually that's going to be one of our next books that we pick up is this latest, and we'll have to tie that into all the other pieces of information and data that we have to draw from that experience when we hear about something else and we go, hey, yeah, Timothy Renner, he mentioned something like that over here. It's cool how it kind of all works together. So we are super appreciative of you coming on and sharing your some of those stories and some of those experiences.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to come on shows and so forth. I'll come back anytime.
We'd appreciate that too. Yeah, for sure. And likewise, if we have anything to contribute, we'll reach out to you and maybe we could be on your show.
Right on. Strangefamiliars.com. That's the best place to reach me. If anybody wants to contact me, all that contact information goes right to me. It's it's the podcast webpage, but all that information goes right to me.
Awesome. Great. So great having you on, and make sure that you guys reach out to Timothy if you have any material that you want to share with him, or just to give him a nice shout out at those different locations. And be sure to check out his new book. Thanks so much.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Everybody, we just wanted to give you a quick thank you for listening to today's show. If you have more information that you want to look for on this show in particular, you can visit lostriverlegends.com under the episodes tab. You can also visit strangefamiliars.com to get access and links to his books and his podcast. And again, we just want to give Timothy a good shout out and a big thank you for coming on and talking about Bigfoot and other strange familiars that he has written about. In addition, we just wanted to give a plug for next week's show. We actually have Brian Forrester on, and Brian is a colleague of L.A. Marzulli, and Brian actually lives in Peru and has lived there for the last 12 years, and he's been involved with extensively in the work with the Paracas skulls, the DNA study, and other megalithic sites in Peru and in Egypt. And you don't want to miss that show. We have some good questions for him. We have a great conversation lined up with Brian. We hope everyone had a great Thanksgiving. We appreciate everyone, and we will see you on next week's show. Goodbye.